Hiring a dev agency can be an amazing experience or an absolute nightmare if you hire the wrong one or you don't know how to work with them. I had a great interview today with Melissa Kwan, a non-technical founder who was trying to build her startup, and she shared some great lessons about what it's like to work with a dev agency and why she needed a CTO, and she had one and didn't realize it. Check out this great story today. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. Welcome back to the Product Driven Podcast. Today with me, I have Melissa Kwan, who's the founder and CEO of eWebinar. She's bootstrapped, started a few different companies. We're going to talk today about her journey of being a founder, bootstrapping a business, trying to build SaaS businesses. And we might need some beers and have a few tears along the way here from all the challenges. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I feel like I should be interviewing you.
Well, we should do that on your podcast. Why don't you tell us about your podcast real fast?
Yeah, so Profit Led is a podcast specifically for bootstrap entrepreneurs like us.
Okay.
So strategies that worked, didn't work along the way, but specifically season 2, which we're in the middle of right now, is about eWebinar's journey to $1 million. So each episode we dive into something we did that worked, didn't work, failures, successes, and just being really transparent about any surprises. Hopefully we're hoping to just give people insight and hopefully save them time and resource and money where we made mistakes.
Well, and so maybe we can learn some lessons from you today from, your experiences of building eWebinar and your other companies. So when you started eWebinar, I guess first tell me, what was your original idea, product idea of why did you decide to go do that?
Yeah, so to give some context, eWebinar is an automated webinar platform. So we don't do anything live, no live audio, no live video. We turn videos into interactive webinars so people can run them around the clock anywhere in the world, any time zone. So it's not for live events that are unique. It's for repetitive training, onboarding, demos. So that's the use case. For 5 years in my last startup, Spacio, which was a real estate tech company, because we're bootstrapped, we're a small team, I was the person that after we closed the customer would do the onboarding and training to make sure the agents, the employees would get on our platform so we could keep getting paid. But because, agents are independent contractors, I would do these onboarding webinars and nobody would show up. So you'd have a 7,000 person company and 100 people sign up and 5 people show up. And that was normal. So I was asked to do them over and over and over. And then but every customer is kind of the beginning of the end of your journey with him. So the more customers we signed up, the worse that problem got. So for 5 years, I was envisioning this perfect product that would do my job for me. Well, I would go and live my life and have fun or just do any other thing. And also, to add to that problem, at the time, I was nomading. So I was doing these repetitive webinars on opposite time zones. So I remember flying into Kyoto, the first thing I would do is go to the hotel lobby, test the internet speed. And if that wasn't fast enough, I would have to go find a SIM card that was and connect that to go to webinar or Zoom. So that was my life. And so after that company was acquired, I didn't sell it for retirement level money. And so I needed to start something else almost immediately because I didn't want to work forever. This was just the idea that kept surfacing. I just couldn't believe there wasn't something like that was built to the extent that I had envisioned. And I was scared to start a new company, but one day I just asked myself, how would I feel if someone else did this before me? Because I was thinking about it so obsessively.
Based on what you just described, though, that doesn't really sound like a webinar to me. It sounds more like a recorded training video or something.
I mean, yeah, I think if you boil it down to its most basic, yes. But the way that we deliver it, the way that you sign up on a landing page, choose a time, you get a reminder or follow up, you have a join link, that whole experience, the way you deliver content is also content itself, right? So yes, it's a recorded video, but whether you watch it on eWebinar, on YouTube, on Instagram, the medium itself also matters because it also puts people into a certain mindset. And the thing that's different about eWebinar is we do have a chat like in any synchronous chat. And I think that's what really defines a webinar from a video, is you can get to someone on the other side.
One thing I was going to ask you is, has AI changed that, right? Because like, can you ask questions during the webinar and like AI potentially could respond to them?
Yeah. So our own chat is built like an intercom, right? So like we have automated like replies, but not like, we are not the AI. Like that's a whole different company. But how it's changed that is only in the last year have people asked us like, can they export chat from our system so that they can train the AI that they're training right now for their support and whatnot. And all these AI bot companies are coming up. So what we did was in the last few months, we allowed people to disable our chat so they can install a chat of their own. Because you can imagine, like, we are building like an interactive video webinar company. We cannot build an AI company, but we can clear the path for someone else to put in, you know, their favorite integration.
So you told me before we started recording that you also had a lot of struggles just building eWebinar from the very beginning.
Yes.
Went through a lot of pain. I'd love to hear your story about that side of it. You know, as a non-technical founder trying to figure out, okay, how do we build this software? Like, what was that process that you had to go through?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge that non-technical founders have is we just don't understand the complexities of technology. Right? We cannot challenge our co-founders in an intelligent way. Like we just have to trust 100%, and hope that the founder that we have is the best one, right? That can deliver. So I had 2 companies before eWebinar, the same founder before that. He was a great engineer, but he was not a good CTO, and that was always like something we never resolved. But he was the best engineer that he could be because he started working with me right out of school. Like we were both pretty young at the time. So, I just had a lot of pain, like trying to work through, like not understanding why he could never meet his timelines. Like I think anyone who's worked with a developer knows what I'm talking about, right? Like when they're like, "Oh, it's coming on Friday." You're like, "Is it this year or like next year?" Like I'm not sure. Yeah, which Friday is it? So I lived 10 years just like kind of on floating timelines, managing expectations on both sides. Because like when he's delivering something for us, I'm also promising something to the customer.
Right. Well, so let me ask you this: why do you think that? Do you think he was a good software engineer, but just not a good CTO, or do you think he was also just not a good software engineer?
I think he was a great software engineer that's never worked in a company.
Okay.
Like, so he was definitely not. He's never worked in a team environment. He's never worked with structure. Like we didn't even have a product management software. Everything was in his head. He didn't really know how a team functions.
And he was a solo developer working by himself.
And that eventually we had a team of 5 other ones under him.
Okay.
But it was all the process was he created it from his head. So that was also limiting for the people that were working under him. Right.
So let me ask you this: for his role, do you think he struggled with delegating and managing other people?
Absolutely. But it wasn't, I always knew it wasn't his fault because he didn't have someone to learn from. And I would push these mentors to him, but like technical people are not like salespeople, right? They're more introverted. No. They don't like, they, you know, like as a salesperson, as a CEO, I'm always trying to learn from other people, but like we're just different breeds, right? So
one of the big challenges I see quite often from talking to other founders or CTOs is a lot of companies, a lot like yourself, they end up with a CTO that they're really more of an individual contributor. They like being the hero. They like solving the hard problems. And if you ask them, like, well, why didn't you manage these other people? Why didn't you delegate more work to them to do? And their answer usually will be something like, I don't have time to do that.
Oh, for sure.
And it's not that they don't have time. They just prioritize themselves doing the work. And I relate to that because I was that person at one point in my career where I just felt like I could do everything faster than everybody else. Yeah. It's like, why would I waste my time to go train somebody how to do this when I could just go do it myself?
But that's a non-leadership mindset. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I was always the bottleneck. And then so eventually you have to realize you're like, okay, yeah, I have all these other people that work with me and maybe they frustrate me because they don't do things as fast as I do or as well as I do, but like I can actually make them a lot more productive if I just shift my mindset of like my job is to make them as productive as I can not me do all the work.
But you can be
And
more productive in the things that you do super well. 'Cause now you've cleared your plate. And you had asked, like, what was the challenge with eWebinar was I came into eWebinar not wanting a CTO because I just had so much PTSD from that. Never, if you are not a technical co-founder and you go to your CTO and you're like, well, why did this take so long? Well, it just does, because it's complicated, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, well, I just have to accept that
all
answer.
you can do is trust them.
Yeah, and it's insulting if you bring in someone else to challenge them because you're co-founders together. And
But
it's
it's not
fragile.
much different if I went to you and I'm like, Melissa, why aren't we selling more stuff?
Yeah.
Right? Be like, why aren't sales higher than they are? You'd be like, well, just trust me, I'll take care of it, right? Like at some point you're like, it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah. And two co-founders have to have trust in that you're taking care of your own lane, right? Part of why it works is because you're not challenging each other on things that you're not an expert on, right?
Yeah.
So I came into eWebinar thinking I didn't need a CTO. I hired a dev shop to be my CTO because I'm like, I'm just going to hire these guys. They're going to be my product people, and I'm going to do what I do best, which is creating and selling, and they're going to do everything for me. And I did, having been in a tech company at that point for 10 years, I still didn't respect technology enough to know that was a bad decision. I just didn't.
So why did it end up being a bad decision? Why do you say that?
Because we spent a year building something that just didn't work. And I don't know how to read code and challenge people, but I do know what good software is because good software works and bad software doesn't work.
So
it just didn't
why do you think there was a divide of taking your product vision and direction and getting them to execute it? Why was that a big miss?
Because I learned this in the process of that year. Because software is not a puzzle, it's a Rubik's Cube. There are so many different paths to get to the same spec. And you can build something, be like, I have satisfied your spec, right? And I think a lot of times dev shops and a company's values are misaligned, right? The dev shop wants to get paid because they get paid on these different or these different checkpoints, or when they hit these goals. But I want really good software to be built, and that takes time and experimentation. So I think that in a 0 to 1 phase, right, or a 0 to 0.5 phase, there's a lot of experimentation. What platforms do we use? How do we get to that point? That's not something that a dev shop, in a mediocre dev shop, by the way, because we couldn't pay top money. This was my money.
Yeah.
Right. So we had to.
It sounds like you were still spending $20,000-$30,000 a month or something to do this.
It was I don't do so in the beginning. It wasn't like we didn't hire a team that I could manage. It was like we always knew that we wanted to hire a team from Vietnam later on, but I hired a team from Canada to do a project. I wanted to get this to a point, and it had to have all these features. That was my MVP that I could sell, and then we would transition this to a more permanent dev shop where we hired people. And then David, my life partner, who was a fractional CTO at the time, he was going to be that person to help transition, to kind of police it, but he wasn't going to code it. So after a year, when things don't work and you're asking well, why doesn't the video player even work? Right. So then I was like, okay, then I asked David to go in and be like, can you just see what's being done? Because I don't know what's being done. And because it was a friend's dev shop, I was like, well, when he says it's going to get fixed, it's going to get fixed, right? What do I know? So there was just so I think the biggest learning was you cannot hire a dev shop without a tech lead to build your 0 to 1 product. They literally have no idea what they're doing because so much of it is experimentation. I think dev shops are great if you need to expand your team, if you need to build a component of a product that already exists, and you have a tech leader to tell them exactly this is how it needs to get built and attach onto our product. But when you're hiring a dev shop as a co-founder, like what I tried to do, it just doesn't work, right?
So as somebody who owns a dev shop, I agree with you. But I think there are different levels of this, right? I often describe it as kind of defined work versus undefined work. And I think most dev agencies, most software developers in general, are pretty good at doing defined work. It's like, hey, we know what needs to be done, just go
Yeah.
execute on this thing. I think most of them are really terrible at undefined work, or
Yeah.
work where you're like, we're not really sure what we need to do. We need to sort of figure it out. And I think the challenge is a lot of times, especially from non-technical people who don't really understand building software, and I'm not necessarily describing you when I say this, but usually
You
when
can
they go to
describe
the
me. I own it.
when they go to the development team, I feel more like they don't even explain their problems. They actually explain more of the symptoms of their problems. And then as a developer, you have to ask a lot of questions to actually figure out what their problem really is. I feel like you almost have to play doctor a little bit. Like you come in, you're like, oh, my stomach hurts. And it's like, okay, well, why? Like you got to ask a lot of questions, because people that have never built software before, they don't necessarily understand like what's possible and what could be done, or they don't think about all the things that have already been done. Like, oh, the software already does all these things. And it's a little bit of the Rubik's Cube that you mentioned of like, okay, there could be a lot of different ways to do this.
Yeah.
And it's my job as a developer to figure out like which way is the best way. Like you're just telling me the symptoms of like, I need the product to do this so I can sell more stuff. Like go figure out how to do that thing.
Yeah.
Somebody has to bridge that gap, because that's where the like undefined part of the product part of this lies. Does that make sense?
I mean, also, like, when I say experimentation, there's also like, you go partly into this thing, you realize, oh, that's not the best way. We got to do it again.
Right.
But the dev shop doesn't want to do that because they want to get to the next payment. Like they're also paying their people.
Well, so that's
they
the
need to
thing.
get to that next payment. So
that highlights another potential problem, not really a problem, but if you're paying them by the project of like, okay, you only get paid if you complete X, that's also a challenge for what you just mentioned, where like the way that we work, it's by the month. So it doesn't really matter like what we do.
Yeah.
You're like, we bill you by the month. So if we experiment all month long, like that's totally cool.
But as a bootstrap company that's spending my own money, I can't have an unlimited spend. So I needed to know to get to my MVP so I could start generating revenue. This is the product that I need. How long will it take? How much is it? Right.
And that makes sense because they're trying to hit exactly whatever the statement of work is, right? They're like, we need to deliver exactly X, and we want to put
sell it.
And they're actually motivated to put as little effort as possible into it because they get paid on the statement of work, right? Like if they do that statement of work in 1 hour or 100 hours, it doesn't actually matter because you're going to pay for the delivery of the work.
Yeah.
And that's part of the struggle with working with dev agencies too. It's like, if that is the kind of relationship you have with them, it is more transactional than like you're paying them a monthly retainer and they're always there. And it's less about the deliverables of the work. It's more about building the long-term team and the long-term like vision.
But we were always going to do that after. Like we always knew that like, okay, we want the product and then we want a team we can actually afford like monthly to then build on the thing that we have. So like that was kind of my thought process. Yeah. But luckily, I always had a CTO sleeping beside me, and I didn't really know that. David came in, started advising.
That's the most ironic part of this whole story, is you're literally sleeping next to the person you needed to solve all of these problems.
Well, think about how painful it is after spending like $350,000, and then you're like, wait, well, I should just be paying you that, and then not paying these other people that. So, it didn't end well. That relationship didn't end well with the dev shop. It was my friend's dev shop, so I think that was like one of the toughest things is like not having that relationship fully recover. Because I think everyone thinks they did their best, and I know that's true.
Well, they're like, hey, you gave me the requirements, we delivered it.
Well, I had to cut it off because everybody was bleeding at the time. Like they weren't hitting that milestone. It wasn't working. They were paying people still to try to get to that milestone. The product in the end was way too complicated for the capability of that shop and of their people. But they were trying to do it so they could get paid. So then I wasn't getting a product. They were burning money. Nobody was happy. So then we needed to end that relationship early. But of course, they thought we didn't want to pay them. But then I thought I already paid them way more than what they delivered. Like I paid them 75% of the final product when it was like 25%. So everybody feels like they were getting screwed. Yeah. So, like it kind of is what it is. But in the end, like it's a business. And we need to get to revenue as quickly as possible, and we need the best people on the team. And it turns out my husband, was the one that came in to try to figure out why things weren't working. And then it turns out he's like a really good developer. So then we ended up ending that relationship, bringing him on as a co-founder. And here we are 5 years later.
I just can't believe that's the twist of the story is the
But
whole time.
I told him, I'm like, why
husband
didn't
was the
you
missing
say
piece.
something? Like, why didn't you tell me that you could do that? And he was like, well, I know you, and like, you have to also come to that decision on your own. But also, previous to that, he's had a couple startups that he was at, not like as a CTO co-founder, that didn't work out. So he was kind of at a point in his life where he's like, should I even spend time in startups? Like, are they ever going to work? And he has 2 kids that he's been, that were going to go to university. So he can't just keep burning money, like his own savings, on trying to work for super early startups. So he also needed to come into like really believing in this product and my vision, and knowing that I'm the one that's really going to follow through. Like, so there were questions that, he kind of had to come to conclusion on his own by watching me work. So it is what it is, but we came to that conclusion, and I'm happy that we're here now.
So now you have him working as your CTO, but you still have other developers.
Yeah.
But now that team just runs so much better because you have the right leader of the team.
Yeah. I mean, he spent 20 years at Microsoft as a product manager, and then he was like a CTO for startups, and then he was a fractional CTO. So like he's had like a 25-year like career in like big and small teams. So very good at process, but also like very good at minimizing like process. So the first thing he did was like, okay, we're signing up for Monday, and then set up all like basically just set up spreadsheet looking things that are kind of automated, where like, so anybody at any given time could go in and see what we're working on and what's getting pushed out next. I never in my life had that visibility.
Okay.
And he hates calls. We all hate calls. So he doesn't even have check-ins with his team. Like if he has to one-on-one, then like, but everyone just goes in and like picks the thing that they're doing, and everything is on Slack. And I just never seen this kind of like well-oiled machine efficiency. And it's because of that we have the product that we have, but it's also because he's able to build with scaling in mind, that our product doesn't break, and when it does, he knows exactly where to look. So it's this is like for the first time I'm understanding the difference between a good co-founder and a great co-founder. But sometimes, you have to work with your cards. So I don't believe that like you have to wait until you find an absolute great co-founder before you start. Like they don't really exist, everywhere. So
you might be sleeping with them and you didn't know it.
Yeah. So definitely ask your husband or wife first before you spend any money. But you know what I mean, like with a good co-founder, you can still build a good business.
Well, I love it. It's a very cool story, and I really appreciate having you on the show today. And I hope one day I'll be able to repay and be on your podcast. So
absolutely.
Again, this was Melissa Kwan, founder and CEO of eWebinar, and you might be a great product for us at Fullscale. So I need to do some webinars and use them for our marketing. So
I hope so.
Yeah, we don't do that today, but that is on the list to do.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much.